Good morning to you. I hope you slept well. And if you didn't sleep well, you know how to make yourself feel good. Today we're going to talk about the Panther platform. In depth, we're going to talk about some things that, well, even people like myself really didn't cover every single thing before. This is going to be a video where I go in to the deep bottoms of everything that could go wrong with the Panther platform. This is a 2006 Lincoln Town Car. This has been my car for years now. I got this car with 190 some thousand miles on it. It has got 256 close to 1,000 miles on it now. This car has been the absolute best car that I have ever driven or owned. They just do not make cars like this car anymore. Even years after this car has been built, there's not a car on the road that rides as comfortable as this car does. There's not a car on the road that makes you feel like this car makes you feel. Years after you find Lexuses and Cadillacs and stuff like that, eventually the suspension becomes clunky and tappy and just loose, and no matter what you do, you can never get that new feel back after they've spent years and years and years on the road. This one here feels the same as it did when it was brand new, and it's an absolute joy. One of the most common problems with this car was there were water leaks. Water leaks on this car were a big thing, to the point where people would start cutting out the carpet, putting towels and stuff down. What would happen is it would leak water at the firewall area, and then it would travel to the back of the car, and you would think that you were getting water in the floor from the back somewhere or the rear window or something, and that normally wasn't the case. As you can see here with this car, somebody cut the carpet out to soak up the water that had been getting in the floor at one time. There's a couple spots that water could come from. Could come from the HVAC box. It goes underneath the floor, travels underneath the passenger seat, ends up back there because that's the furthest point back, and that's where it just congregates. Normally it's not coming from the back at all. Another place that was a common spot for it to come from, let me open this hood. Another spot that was common to come from was here. Underneath this plastic here, there is a screen that is part of your fresh air inlet. Around that screen, there was a foam seal that would rot away. When that foam seal would rot away, and this couldn't... Look here. Look, watch this. Look at the debris. Debris and stuff gets in there, clogs up this little drain right here. It has a water deflector that deflects the water off the side, and it drains down at the bottom. Now with that being plugged up, the water would sit up in that trough area, and it would get underneath that foam seal, and then it would go down the firewall and end up in the back seat back there and rot out the floor. Smell like mildew. It would cause a really rough smell inside the cabin of the vehicle. And then there's another drain over here in the middle. There's another drain down in the center. It also gets plugged up. And that would help cause water to back up underneath this plastic cowl area, and it would end up inside the car. It would find holes in the firewall, places to back up. Also, the windshield wiper motor is right down in the center of this hump underneath that plastic. What happens if that water backs up or something turns to ice inside there during the wintertime and it's full of water? What if that area, that compartment, fills up with leaves, and those leaves are just wet enough and it engulfs that motor and freezes that motor? Windshield wipers won't work until the vehicle starts to warm up. Ask me how I know, because it happened to me. Another thing, there are some inherent issues where water collects on this car. Because of how the water tips off and drains down, because of people not keeping these troughs clean here along the window. See, I've even got debris here because I haven't cleaned here in a while. Water will collect in these areas and it will find ways to back up in this seal. Sometimes it will come out, sometimes it will find other ways inside the car, even down in here. Other areas that would rot out are down here at the bottom of the door. People wouldn't keep those areas clean, as the water would drip and drain down in there, and it would just collect in those areas and have nowhere to go. And the leaves and stuff would keep that moisture pocket down there at the bottom. It would rot out those corners. Another thing with this car, switch panels. Switch panels were notorious for not wanting to fit and unseat and unseat and unseat. Good luck trying to find the one that matches your car. Good luck trying to figure out how, after the points of contact where it snaps in wears, getting it fixed. It's fixable. Sometimes not easy. These little trim pieces here on these door handles. This material, you pull on this over and over and over again, not being careful. Eventually it wears the Phillips screws or whatever behind here that go into the door that hold the strap in. And it starts to break the tabs where these snap in underneath here. And they don't ever sit right again. That's another issue. Another issue with this car is the blend door motors in the dash. They're notorious for going bad. This one, they're starting to go bad at 255,000 miles. I don't know if they've ever been done before, but I can hear it now whenever the vehicle's running. You can hear the blend door behind or one of the mode doors going tuk, tuk, tuk. And you can play with it to get it in different positions, and it'll go away for a little bit and it'll come back. They work. They're starting to go bad. In order to fix that, sometimes depending on which one it is, you got to pull the dash on it to fix it. Another thing that was an issue with these was the cylinder heads. Cylinder heads on this car, the head gaskets underneath, the head gaskets, if you look up from the bottom of the vehicle, right underneath the exhaust manifold, you'll see along the head, it'll look like oil. And it's not coming from the valve cover. It's not a valve cover leak. It's actually the head gasket's leaking. Back in the day, they used to pull these engines like it was nothing. Rip them down, put new front cover gaskets and stuff on, new head gaskets, the intake manifold gaskets and stuff on, put them back together. I just had a guy come in the shop, and he had a ton of the things that are notorious for plaguing these cars. He had a ton of those things going on. Would it cause performance issues? No, it would run like a top, no matter what. But the 5.4s and the 4.6s, you'd have to pull these engines out. You'd have to reseal the engine. Another thing that could happen on these is, back in the bell housing, behind where the flywheel sits, there's a freeze plug. That freeze plug, depending on your coolant mixture and stuff like that, or whatever it would be, freeze plug would pop out. You'd have to pull the transmission, clean everything up, put a new freeze plug in it, dress it all up. And that was in such a bad spot, it's actually not uncommon for that to happen. Another thing, the intake manifold runner from the front. The aluminum runner that comes over and touches the plastic from one side to the other, or the old style, would start to leak. This aluminum runner right here. It would go across and it would leak at those points where it would make contact. You gotta replace the intake manifold. There's also a pass-through tube that goes down underneath the intake manifold, goes on the front of the block behind the water pump, the little nipple there, a line slides over it, a metal tube, and it goes down the valley and cuts around to the side. That would also leak. Intake manifold's got to come off. Another issue with this car is the transmission. The transmission at the back, where the tail housing bolts on, this gentleman the other day that brought his 03, 04 town car in, it had that exact problem. All around the tail shaft housing, where it goes on the transmission, it was leaking at that gasket. I got to pull a drive shaft, got to pull tail shaft off, got to put a new tail shaft housing assembly and stuff on. They were notorious for those going bad on these cars. It wouldn't leak at the seal, it would leak at the actual housing where it bolted to the transmission. That was a normal occurrence to see on these. You know, a couple $100 part, a couple hours labor, you'd be back in business, back on the road for another 10, 15 years. Doesn't seem like that's that big of a deal, but it's a big deal. These cars had charging system issues, flickering lights. Early models had instrument clusters that would, when I say instrument cluster, I mean the RPM gauge, the speedometer gauge, the little gauge in the middle that shows your mileage and stuff on the car. They had issues where I would say like 2004, 2005 model and earlier, a lot of them would have to be replaced because of cluster problems. And when they started having cluster problems, we'd also have issues with other parts of the vehicle where some of the communication circuit and stuff ran through the cluster. Charging system issues, though. Charging system issues was a thing that was a very, very dirty thing to get into on this car. You can see I have an extra ground down there where I have put the ground on the alternator, and I've run it across that up over here and over to the battery, and I've got an extra ground going to my battery because these cars had problems with ground straps from the body to the engine, from the engine to the chassis in the rear. Even someone like the Lincoln Continentals that weren't directly part of the Panther platform series body like this, they also had those same issues. Yeah, it was a problem with these. And because of the issues that Ford had back in the late 90s to mid 2000s, you could go through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 alternators before you get one that you could put on the car that charges appropriately. I remember a couple years ago, I had a guy come in that's a subscriber here on the channel. His name is Jalen. He came into the shop. He said, hey man, I got this charge light on, even though I've done all this stuff. I bought a brand new Ford alternator right from the dealer. That didn't do it. I bought another one. That didn't do it. Sure enough, I put the Ford alternators that he bought from the dealer, the Motorcraft ones, they were no good. I bought like 5 or 6 other alternators and put on there as well. They were no good until I got to a Napa Premium battery or alternator. Once I put the Napa Premium alternator on there, everything was fine. Charge light went out, everything worked good. And I load tested the sensing wire. I load tested the main wire coming from it. I did all that. I jumped the Gen Mon and Gen Con wires to make sure that they were charging appropriately, or they were communicating appropriately, and they would jump up on key on and then come back down and stabilize. Told me I had good wires. I had good communication going on there. Just the voltage regulators in those alternators were built very poorly. Or they were not built correctly for in the aftermarket world or the OE world for these cars. You'll find a lot of Ford alternators and a lot of aftermarket alternators that will not work in these cars. And you're sure it's an alternator problem, but it still will not turn the charge light off. And you're like, man, what did I do wrong? Somebody obviously had to misdiagnose this. No, nobody misdiagnosed it. It literally is. The voltage regulator programming inside there is not built correctly to communicate with that car. There's so many out there on the market that say they fit these cars and they'll work, and they do not work. Even though they do fit the car and they were built for the car, they were built incorrectly for the car. Another issue that people had with these is when they went to go change out the power steering pump, the bolts would freeze up inside the block, and they're kind of difficult to get to. And you'd have to cut the bolt heads off and extract bolts out of the blocks. It was not a very, very fun time. Also, the AC compressor, same issue. When the AC compressor would go out, not a fun time. Miserable time, to be honest with you. Another issue with these was, look down here. You see that air conditioning accumulator right there? You see how I have it zip tied to the bracket that it goes in? You could just cut the bottom of it off too and leave the top. Those would rot out because they would put a plastic housing all the way around them, and the drain on the bottom would plug up. And because the drain on the bottom would plug up, it would rot the housing out. Yes, that was also a problem with these. That's one of the first things I did to this car when I got it. A lot of people will go through and they'll service the AC systems in here, and they don't know where the fixed orifice tube in here. This is what's called a fixed orifice tube flood system. And it's a restricted orifice that sits in the line that controls the amount of refrigerant that flows into the evaporator. And it's an old school design. It's not efficient at all. But a lot of people forget whenever you service the AC system, you should service that as well. You might find that there's metal and stuff in the actual fixed orifice tube screen that indicates you got a compressor problem, that you probably need to flush the system and replace the compressor as well. And that sits right here inside this. You see this? It's got this taper. It's fat right here, and then it tapers down to real small. There's a tube that sits inside here that fits inside that, and then you snap this back together. It's a fixed orifice tube. And you normally can see that indication by this little crimp mark right there. Here's a little crimp mark right where my nail's at. There's a little indentation right underneath this piece of plastic right here. There's an indentation there and there, and then there's a flat spot. That's because that orifice tube goes in here and slides in and slides right up to that indentation, and that's how it knows to stop. That needs to be changed whenever servicing the AC system. Nobody ever remembers to do that. The wheels on these cars peeled like crazy. People would have to go get a set of OE ones or pull the wheels off or find some used good ones to swap theirs out, because whenever these wheels would peel, they'd start to oxidize. It'd start to look ugly. And the caps on them would get stolen all the time because people would lose their caps. Another thing that people complain about going down the road on these is, I hear this like under like in an area where I've got a building close to me and I'm coming to a stop, I can hear this tap, 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 tap sound. And it sounds like it's coming from outside the vehicle, not the engine area. It's because the caps that would snap into the center are spring-loaded caps, and they would tap back and forth as the wheel was moving at slow speeds. It would just tap, and they would bounce back and forth in the hole that they're sitting in, and it would be an annoying sound, and people would be like, man, it's so annoying. Can you get that to stop? They would start shoving little bits and pieces of paper down inside there on the relief part to unsnap the cap. Not a good idea either, though. This car was built with a very lazy shifted transmission. They wanted people that drove this car to feel like they were in the lap of luxury, and they are. The problem is, with the lazier shifts and the longer it took to go into gear, it actually caused a little bit more transmission wear. And you'd start seeing these transmissions come in 140, 150,000, 160,000 miles. They'd have to be rebuilt, because people would want to drive them spirited. But the only way to do that would be to do exactly what I did. I got an SET X4 programmer. I downloaded the 90 or the the Crown Vic tune. There's like an 87 and then there's a 93 Crown Vic tune into it. But what I did when I went in there to download everything before I did the Crown Vic tune is I actually went to a section that was part of the transmission, and I increased the line pressure about 5% at first, and I drove around. I said, still a little bit lazy. Then I went 10%. I said, okay, now we're starting to get to where we need to be, and it's a nice crisp shift. And then I got to 15%. I'm not telling everybody to do this, but I did that to this car at 192,000 miles, and it shifts absolutely beautiful now. It's a nice, firm, crisp, boom, you know it's there shift. It'll give you a little push when it shifts, and it's not so lazy, and it wears the transmission less. Another problem with these cars was every once in a while you get throttle body codes. That was an issue with these. There was a TSB out back in the day that talked about it. His throttle body here would start to act up, and you'd have to replace the throttle body or clean it. Most of the time I had to replace it. With these cars being older and on the road a little bit longer than most other cars, because they literally get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles on them before they're no good anymore, and even at that, it's just a simple couple $1,000s put back into them and they're back on the road another 10 years. The hoses, the rubber hoses, like to rot out on these real easy, especially like evap hose. This hose right here, I noticed right away that I could push my finger, it almost turned to mush when I would push on it. I said, oh, that's got to go. Make sure you're checking that on your car as well. Not all cars are the same. And the older ones, this FOT actually may not be here. It may be down here or something like that. Your line might be reversed from mine. But you know by that indentation that I was showing you, it's right there in the plastic. Right here. That metal crimp indentation. One thing that would happen with these at times, I haven't seen it super common on the town cars and the Grand Marquis and the Crown Vics. Spark plugs would blow out of the cylinder head. Yep, people would say spark plug blew out on them, and they'd have to tap the hole and put the spark plug back in. And with the new time insert or insert that goes in there, that was another issue that may end up happening with these cars, but never had it happen to me, and I own a couple of them. I just recently bought a $505 1999 Crown Vic from the police auction. It has axle code DK, which indicates 355 limited slip differential, and it's actually faster than these cars. The Crown Vic police cars are much more spirited, and they drive really nice, very quick. Not as luxurious by any means, but very nice cars. A common issue that you will find is in the back of these vehicles where the body panel comes down, you'll see rot in that area of where the wheel's throwing water up at the trunk, and that back pocket will rot out. I had to cut mine out and weld new metal in on this side. So if you can get one that's in pretty good shape, immediately clean that area up and spray it with fluid film, surface shield back there, AMSOIL HD metal protectant spray, and down here in the corners where this arch goes down and it turns down, that area will rot out right there at the end. So if you can buy one where that hasn't happened to it yet, I would suggest protecting those areas and spraying those areas immediately. The absolute worst job to do on this car has got to be the exhaust manifolds. The exhaust manifolds down here, those metal manifolds, they rot out. Studs rot out, they snap. This manifold is about 4 years old. It's getting to the point where it's going to need to be done. It's in really rough shape. I just did that manifold not too long ago, and it's already to the point where about every 5-6 years you'll get out of them, and then they're going to have to be done again. And what I did on mine, you don't have to do it on yours, maybe you shouldn't do it on yours, is I actually look down here. You see how you can see the top of the strut tower? I actually opened this up. I cut a box right here in my plastic. I opened it up wider so I can reach through there and do work when I need to. Yeah, it's gonna need manifolds done in the next couple years, but they're kind of a bear. You should probably expect a good 6 to 8 hours to do the manifolds. If stuff starts to break, maybe even more sometimes. And I know that sucks that it'd be $1,400, $1,500, $1,600 in manifolds, but you want your car running right, that's what you'll pay. And if you're really concerned with it, well, they make long tube headers for it. There's a company called Stainless Works, and they're about $1,700, $1,800 for a set of headers for it. Stainless steel, new studs, new everything. That lasts a lot longer, but it's kind of up to you and your budget. I think, one more thing that people complained about with these cars was whenever you'd service the brakes, they'd be like, man, my pedal's spongy. It was not like this before, before you did the brakes and you bled the system and stuff. These brake systems are very finicky in these. They're very touchy on these. I go get in that Crown Vic, that 99 I just bought. It's rock hard firm up top. You get in this car, well, about a year and a half ago, you got in this car, and you could feel, man, it was a little bit soft. It should be more firm than that. The softness doesn't feel good. I had to bleed the system and bleed the system and bleed the system, and then activate the ABS pump to run the ABS pump so it could push fluid through the line. And then I activated the ABS pump again, and finally, after 3 times of bleeding and 3 times of activating the ABS pump, I got most of that hard pedal back, but it still never ended up right. Could be a lazy valve in the ABS pump because of how old these are. Could be the fact that you gotta bleed it again and keep working it. But they're very difficult to get that strong hard pedal out of these cars sometimes. It's kind of a known issue with these. Another issue with these that nobody thinks about is right here. That little flap that comes up. Sometimes it'll be lazy and it'll stay in, and you got to readjust the rod assembly and stuff inside the hood. That little catch for the hood that pops out right here, it pops out, and then you grab it and you open the hood. That there's a assembly up top that sits up underneath here that it bolts to, and you can stretch the rod out using a pair of pliers and try to make the curve longer and stuff so it pops out better. And I've done that on a few subscribers' cars here on the channel, but that's adjustable. A lot of people think you got to replace the whole thing. You don't have to replace the whole thing. It can be adjusted to an extent. As of right now, I think that's about the only annoying things that I can think of that really plague these cars, that are not normal, just out of the ordinary maintenance stuff that you would expect to have to do with a vehicle. For right now, I'm going to part ways with this video, and I'm going to say, I hope you have a great day. I hope you have learned something from this video. This is absolutely the best car on the road. I will close out with this. This is the best car on the road today. They do not make a car, and I will stand by that and go to my grave. There's not a single car that is as efficient as this car. And when I say efficient, just understand the body of this car, the size of this car, the reliability of this motor, the overhead cam setup. The volumetric efficiency is more efficient with this car versus a pushrod engine. This is a much more reliable, desirable setup, and it just lasts. Flat out just lasts. It makes you feel like you're in luxury while you're riding in this car. It's an absolute joy to be in. If I were any of you and you had access to purchase one of these, I would get one and I would enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something from this. I know the Car Wizard recently did a video talking about how he also agrees that this is the most reliable car on the road, and he is correct. It's the cheapest, most reliable, most efficient, most luxurious car on the road, and will always be, unless they bring it back. I'd love to see one of these with a 5-liter in it. 5-liter Coyote and a 6R80 transmission. You talking about a dream package? Oh my God. Anyhow, hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for being a part of today's segment. I know this was a long video. I absolutely enjoy and love these cars. And if any of you are in the Chicagoland or Illinois area or the surrounding states or across the country and you would like your Crown Vic, Mercury Grand Marquis, or Lincoln Town Car serviced, please come see me at Brighton Automotive in Brighton Park, Chicago, 3967 South Archer. I'd love to take care of you. The gentleman the other day with the 0304 Town Car, I had to give him the bad news. I said, brother, I know you brought this in here for a transmission service. You got other problems going on, man. The radiator's leaking trans fluid out of the internal cooler. It's cracked in the bottom and it's leaking out real slow. You got both cylinder heads on both sides leaking just a light stream of oil down the block. It's not real bad to stop you from driving it, but this engine needs to be resealed. Your tail shaft that goes onto the transmission in the back, it's got all fresh fluid all the way down it. It needs more than just a trans service. You need several $1,000s worth of work. It's going to get expensive. Unfortunately, luxury cars, or even the most reliable cars, they can only be reliable for so long before they start showing their age. Some of them more than others. I noticed it's the earlier 2001 to like 2004 models that show, because they're older. Maybe this in the next few years will start doing what they are. This is a 2006. But he said, yeah, you know what? Don't even do the work then, man. I got to try to figure out what I'm going to do. Am I going to let you reseal this engine? Am I going to let you, you know, put a new trans in it or put a new tail shaft in it and reseal that back up? I don't know yet. I'll just come pick it up. Thanks for being honest. A lot of people would think that these have timing chain problems. It's got 256,000 miles on it, and it's got the original timing chain in it, and I beat the mess out of it every day. The key to keeping these cars healthy is coolant changes every 60,000 miles, plugs every, I don't know, 60 to 80,000 miles. Some people run up to 100 in these, but I would say 60 to 80 because these are pretty forgiving. Ignition coils like to go bad in these cars, so I change my ignition coils out, all of them, every 50,000 miles. I know that sounds silly, but I do it because I don't want problems. And I use an OE equivalent ignition coil, and I just go up to O'Reilly's and I get them for like 35 bucks a piece. Or you can get them at Rock Auto. They're called Blue Streak, and Blue Streak makes a lot of OE. Don't tell nobody I told you, but Blue Streak makes a lot of OE ignition coils. So you can buy them at the Blue Streak cheap price in their box versus the name brand part that they're actually building them for Motorcraft or whoever. But yeah, no timing chain problems, no nothing. Keep the oil change. Keep the transmission serviced every, 40, 50,000 miles. Coolant every 40, 50,000 miles, 60,000 miles. Oil every 3 to 5,000 depending on how you're driving it. 3,000 in town, 4,000 mixed in town and highway, 5,000 highway. You'll be good. All right, guys. Take care. Thanks for watching. Sorry for rambling. I'm out.